think we have a limited number of outlets, so we might need to share.
Good job.
Maddie and I will start with a few questions, then we can bring in the audience. But there's evidently a strong sense of community between New York filmmakers. Many of you here have worked on each other's films or have shared collaborators, but I think each of you tackle making films in the city in uniquely personal and political ways. So maybe by way of introduction, I'd like to hear from each of you about how you got the idea for your film, and as you do that, feel free to acknowledge any of the cast and crew who may be in the audience or elsewhere. So yeah, Joe, you screened first. I don't know if you want to start off.
I'll go first. I'll break the seal. Well, yeah, I do have a bunch of cast and crew in the audience right now. Particularly, I want to acknowledge Ricky Porter, our DP, Richard Levine, our producer, and then Robert Spence, who plays Dan in the movie, the more successful spouse. Yeah, I have a more successful spouse. So it's not about me, but I've thought about it a little bit, so I think a lot. I think a lot of times when you earn something, you automatically, or you judge your success in life often by the things that you don't have, not what you do. So I think that's like universal, and so I think I was interested in making something kind of about that idea and how I don't know, like no one really cares about. It's important that you care about yourself the most, because really no one else kind of will. At least I think.
In terms of the film, I had the idea for the line, "Keep doing that and you'll get your dinner." And then I was excited about that, and then it seemed to progress naturally to this conversation about gender roles and internalized misogyny and sexual identity. And I wanted to thank people who worked on the film: Ari Rothschild, the colorist; Lydia Nikonova, our wonderful DP; and our EP, Vanessa McDonnell, who provided support with the eye slicer.
Yeah, I think more people who worked on my film might be here than I even know about. So I don't want to forget anyone, so I'm not going to say anybody. But but you're all really, really wonderful, and I was sorry that Hannah and Dara aren't here, but I wanted to give them a call out because they were really crucial for this. But yeah, the idea of it, I have been in New York for about 10 years now, and I've been griping the entire time that it's like unphotogenic and hard to shoot in, and then I decided I had to make something here, and so I had to trick myself, and my way of doing that was, I went into Central Park and was trying to think of an idea for a film, and I realized I could deceive myself if I told myself it wasn't New York, and then suddenly it was very photogenic, yeah, that's how we ended up with the city of A.
I'd like to thank the children in the film, some of whom are here, I think, well, or at least they're represented here. I'd like to thank Graham Swan, who is responsible for, I think, half of the films in this program, Zach Wright and Alon Simka, who produced the film, Barton Courtwright, the DP, John Arnos, the wonderful production designer, Scott Hamra, who plays Helmar, Caroline Luft, who's here, but I hear another voice coming from the audience. The photograph by Thomas Hopker, who is a German photojournalist who took this photo on the Williamsburg waterfront, was something that was always kind of compelling to me when I saw it a few years ago, and that was mainly the starting point for the film.
My short is called Moving, and I was telling somebody about this really awful experience where I wasn't laughing about it at all. And then in the process of telling that story, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of funny. And then it felt like a really good impetus for a short film, just something that could be done in a day. And there was a lot of practical elements to that. But I was just moving around for about like a year. So I was just really used to the schlepping. And yeah, I just wanted to make an ode to that.
Hi, I'm Jay. I made the thing that kills me the most, and I want to thank the people who appeared on screen and the narrator, the Giuliano family and Dennis. They're all here, and so that was sort of footage I shot a while ago. Mini DV cameras back then were proprietary, so you couldn't always. I basically couldn't play that footage for a long time, but I'd always think about it. That footage of that guy Jack blowing out the camera with a light, and I knew I had a rant about how much Dennis was frustrated by Jack. And then after the festival last year, I got really back into the Jerky Boys. I don't know, does anyone know who the Jerky Boys are? And I was kind of trying to think of like making a movie that was like Jerky Boys-esque. And then I started putting the footage together. And then when I saw that he talked about Jack freeloading his way to Disney World, but I also had a shot of Goofy, I was like, oh, I think this is a short film. And they've been great friends to me for a long time. Dennis and Sam are really responsible for kind of my filmmaking education because they're rabid cinephiles, so it's really nice that it's kind of come full circle.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Myna. Where's Lucy? Where are you? Oh, Lucy, that's the lady that started this movie. She's my co-writer and the lead. She was hit by a car, and she was a fit model. And her story, we were talking about a film idea, and so many things about her experiences spoke to me as sort of a proxy of like the difficulty of both being an artist in New York City, but also just this woman who's navigating all these bureaucracies and systems around her physical self. And the film sort of strangely became a conversation with a Cleo from 5 to 7, where it's like Cleo from 5 to 7, she gets a death, meets death sort of at the end of the film, and here this is an artist who like meets death at the beginning of the film and then just has to pay for it on her limited means. I have so many people to thank in this room. There's so many people who have put a roof over my head and also been champions and are in the film or were part of making the film. So Lana, our executive producer, and John McGarry, amazing editor, and Aaron Kowalczyk, the DP, and An and Gideon and Lucy, amazing cast. I think there are other cast members are here, and Jessica Daniels, amazing casting director and friend that I've worked with for a long time. Thank you, everybody that's here. Thank you.
So I'll ask maybe one more question at large to the group, and we can kind of go from there. It's a very eclectic bunch of films that we've gathered this evening, across genres, across formal approaches, but they're all, as you know, the old saying goes, all art is political, and all of these films are political in varying degrees, whether based on the content of the film, the story being told, the way that story is presented, but also inherent in the production of making an independently produced short film in a city like New York with a very distinctive filmmaking culture. So I don't know if anybody wants to riff on that and just talk about the political thinking that went into the making of the film that you were presenting.
Well, I had two movies here that were overtly political, and then I said I want to make one that's not really political. That was part of it, but I do think it is always on your brain a little bit, but that was my take. But.
Well, I guess I saw my film as, I guess the characters move towards openness about her feelings and kind of the way she's wrestling with questions about gender roles and sexual identity and internalized misogyny. And so I think we kind of all grapple with these things in some way or other. So I guess I was just exploring them, hoping that they would resonate. And I think that's political.
Well, I mean, this country is still living out the consequences of Bush Cheney Rumsfeld in a way that I think, unfortunately, has been taken for granted. I mean, now he's the kindly painter of watercolors. And I was in high school on 9/11, and I remember the very emotional, sinister sense of consensus, love it or leave it, these colors don't run, etc. Enya's Only Time being used to celebrate or sentimentalize this terrible tragedy, and it comes up in the film. I think, well, given where this country is now, the consequences have been borne out electorally in some very unfortunate way, and it's an event that I've been thinking an awful lot about this year, and in addition to that photograph that Thomas Hopkirk took.
The film's sort of interested in sort of a tiny, small sliver of being an individual in a giant system, and here we have Lou, who's like, I feel like I have a lot of Lou days where you're sort of dealing with being just one little tiny cog in a very big capitalist system, in the healthcare system, in how female bodies are presented, and Lou is someone who's both like wrestling with that all day, but then ultimately there's sort of this sad Band-Aid that involves a green sweater that kind of like helps her get through the day. So it's both sort of a celebration of her and kind of an indictment of her at the same time.
Bingham and Adinah, can you talk about working with your lead actress, Hannah Gross, who gives, I think, very different kinds of performances in both of your films? I'm curious to hear how you approached working with her for your work.
Yeah, well, I wrote this with Hannah in mind, and then was really, and then I got in touch with her and was really struggling, though, with thinking who I could put alongside her, because I don't know. She's a very, as you can see in Adinah's film, she can carry something completely by herself, and can like become a film. In this amazing, yes, oh, the God, that's terrible. I'm sorry. Oof. Anyhow, she the one person who kept on coming back into my head, I'd seen her in one or two things before. There's actually like a whole continuing like adventures of Hannah and Dara, a series of films made by various directors, but I wasn't aware of all of them. And then my first meeting with Hannah about this was like, what do you think about Dara? And then it turns out that they are like childhood best friends. And then something very special happened with the two of them, and where they were both able to have that thing that they've been having since they were 6 or something, and also bring something darker and more upsetting into it. I don't know, I'm still like very, very shocked by Hannah's performance at the very end. But much better than my film, or probably any of the other films that Hannah or Dara have made together, is they made a remake of Charlie's Angels when they were like 5. That's really incredible and should be seen someday.
Well, Hannah and I have known each other for a few years. We worked on a project a long time ago. So I've always wanted to work with her, and when I came up with this, I was like, who can scream? And I was like, Hannah can scream. And then I just texted Hannah, and I was like, do you want to do a short where you carry a mattress and scream? And she was like, yeah. And then it was just kind of from there, we were just riffing off of it, and I feel like we sort of stripped it down to what the film is now, which is a really more just a physical examination in a lot of ways. And I remember kind of over-intellectualizing a lot of decisions, and she was like, it doesn't have to be that complicated, which was cool to hear. And I see this film to be a little bit more, I guess, structural comparatively to other things that I've done. But I mean, when you're physically lifting a mattress, there's only so many things you can think of. and there were technicalities involved in that, but I think it was really more just coming from like a dance background, sort of communicating more in that way than a verbal way. Yeah, I wish she was here.
I think we can open it up to the audience. We have a mic going around, so if you can hold on to your question until it comes to you. Anyone? Should we keep going?
Let's see. Several of these films are more classical in their sort of narrative presentation. And specifically, I'm thinking of Joe's Good News and Myna's Fit Model. Caterina, also Dan Sallitt, is unfortunately not here this evening, but I think I'm interested in your decision to take that approach to these stories and whether that is a departure for you based on your storytelling inclinations, because we've seen a lot of the other films in the program take a more experimental approach or just sort of a more fanciful approach to storytelling. And so what goes into that decision, I guess?
I think it's funny, and I think it says something that you're asking that question to like the normal movies and not the opposite. You'd be like, why'd you only have one shot in your movie? But I think that says something to like the nature of the program, which I think is notable. I don't have a good answer to that question, other than I was interested in telling. I was interested in telling something that I wanted to be human, and that I wanted to take people on a journey, and that I wanted to like really engage people. And so I did not really want kind of the artifice of the format to really come into play too much. I think there is some stuff that happens, hopefully, that isn't just like real life playing out in front of a camera. But it was interesting for me to make that invisible, and so that these people felt like human beings, because kind of my goal was to make, even though like my main goal of the movie was to make these tertiary characters that kind of pop in for like 3 minutes seem like really fleshed out real life people, and so I think that kind of required that access, that like a format that we all kind of know and understand and have grown to like see as invisible. So that was kind of why I felt like that was needed to tell this kind of story.
I like the comfort of fiction. I can hide behind it. So all the characters are, I can speak very directly through fictional characters.
Any other normal movies? No.
Anyone else want to be outed as normal?
Joanna, when did the mermaid costumes figure into your film?
Wait, how did they figure in?
When, how, or yeah. What was your thought process in putting that in?
Well, I mean, I wanted the mermaid costumes to sort of loosely reflect the constraints of gender norms, and one of my favorite conversations in pre-production was with the costume designer, Sophie Selmeroff, and the production designer, Zoe Koch, about just how uncomfortable the tales should be and difficult to walk in, because we wanted to sort of illustrate the constraints that the characters were wrestling with, but also like still leave these characters agency and the ability to walk. And then, just kind of like showing these characters as sort of on, with the action staged on the shoreline, and being kind of between two worlds and sort of dancing around the two areas in a unresolved way, and also just as a funny counterpoint to the dialogue. So that was.
I'd like to know where I can get one.
We're short on time, but we could take one or two questions from the audience. Yes, sir. Question was about the most challenging aspect about shooting in New York.
It's paying for it. It applies to anywhere, probably.
I shot this in LA. hope that's okay.
It's okay.
Hard to follow that up. Was the most challenging thing. Moving around, like getting from place to place to look at things and stuff is often really difficult. Scouting, things like that. But,
I mean, this is the first film I shot on a soundstage and using rear projection, which in itself was a challenge. But Google Street View is very useful, not just for scouting locations, but for filming streets of New York without having to actually go into them, as I found. So, yes.
And I was going to say sound is probably the hardest when you're shooting on location.
Every movie I ever shot in New York where we shot exteriors, someone tried to start a fight with us. And it was usually somebody that just wanted to be disruptive and get attention. And I usually have to lose my temper. A movie I made called Hernia, there's actually in the movie, somebody starting a fight with the lead character. So if you have a camera, someone will come over and mess with you. And I recommend having a group of large men with you and just being really aggressive, because if you give in a little bit, they won't leave you alone.
Good to know. What's not difficult is finding talented people to work with you in New York, so that's a huge plus. Canal Street, I really can't stand shooting in that area, and we shot our exteriors there. Yeah. It's really stressful.
But that being said, you can shoot without a permit and all that stuff, and that's a thing I think that's loosened up in the last 10 years. I think it's like if you have a crew of less than 12, you can just shoot anywhere in public and nobody, legally it's fine, which I think is not the case in LA, or wasn't the case in LA at a certain point. So that's really awesome, and that's cool that that's the case.
Yeah, we could end it there. Joe, Joanna, Bingham, Ricky, Adinah, Jay, and Myna, thank you so much for your films.